Hi, I'm Benjamin Baxter, author of In the Original Text It Says, Word Study Fallacies and How to Avoid Them. In this video, I'm going to give 2 recommendations for how to study the Bible in English. Many people know that the Bible was not originally written in English, and they want to understand the scriptures better by looking to Hebrew and Greek word meanings. In a previous video, I talked about how words don't carry large amounts of meaning on their own, and that meaning is controlled by the context in which those words are found, and those words find significance and their meaning within sentences, paragraphs, passages, discourses. This means you cannot just look up a biblical word meaning in isolation and think those words carry great meaning on their own. I suggested either learning Hebrew, Aramaic, Greek well enough to read and analyze whole passages of scripture within their original languages, or to stick with English. So I would like to suggest 2 tips for using English to learn from biblical scholars who can read and analyze the Bible in its original languages. First, I would recommend learning some general linguistic principles about word meaning and how to use those general principles to think intelligently about what you read, about what you hear, about the meanings of biblical words. And my book, In the Original Text It Says, will walk you through the steps of how to do that. My second recommendation is to compare English translations to get a better understanding of the biblical text. We have a plethora of English translations, and we can use the differences between those translations to better understand the Bible. In this video, I will walk you through, or I'll talk about how and why to compare different versions of the Bible. First off, there's probably 3 common reasons why Bible translations differ in how they translate certain words or sentences. First, a difference in the translations might reflect differences in ancient Bible manuscripts. And the differences in those ancient Bible manuscripts will then reflect or be reflected by differences within English translations. A second reason for differences in English translations is uncertainty about what a word or phrase means in the original text. And translators will make choices that differ from each other in explaining what that means. A third reason for differences between English translations is there may be an agreement about what a word or a phrase means within the original text, but they make different choices in how to express that in English. When you see differences in English translations, I would recommend looking for the lowest common denominator. What's the commonality between these translations? And go with that in your interpretation. If there is no commonality, then assume that either option is possible and take both as serious options. An example of what this looks like is we can look at 1 Timothy chapter 3, verse 1, which the English Standard Version reads, "The saying is trustworthy. If anyone aspires to the office of overseer, he desires a noble task." Other translations say, if anyone aspires, New International Version, to be an overseer, New Living, to be a church leader, New King James, to the position of a bishop, Holman Christian Standard, to be an overseer. There are 2 things to notice in these translations. First, we find in these various translations overseer, church leader, and bishop. These differences should alert us to some uncertainty or disagreement in this passage, either uncertainty about what the role or position was that Paul was describing, or disagreement about how to describe that role or position in current English. We need to avoid choosing the term that suits our theology or a denomination best, and we need to take all of those translations as serious possibilities. Second, note that the ESV calls it an office, New King James a position, and other translations don't use any specific term like office or position. Instead, they say something like, whoever aspires to be an overseer or church leader. When we see these differences, we need to take them seriously. It's reasonable to assume these translation differences reflect disagreement about whether Paul is referring to an official office in the church or to a role that people are serving. And we should take both options seriously rather than just choosing the one that suits best our theology or denominational preferences. A third thing to note in these translations is a difference in who desires this noble task of overseer, church leader, bishop. ESV, if anyone aspires, he desires. NIV, whoever aspires, desires. New Living, if someone aspires, he desires. New King James, if a man desires, he desires. Holman Christian Standard, if anyone aspires, he desires. Now, depending upon our view of the roles of men and women within the church, we might be tempted to emphasize man and he in some of these translations, or We might be tempted to emphasize whoever and anyone in some of these translations. When we are working just with English, we cannot determine why these translations differ, nor can we intelligently determine which one is correct. We must therefore seriously consider the possibility that 1 Timothy 3 verse 1 is specifically referring to a man who desires to serve this role in the church. We also need to seriously consider the possibility that 1 Timothy 3:1 is referring to anyone who desires to serve this role in the church. When we're studying the Bible in English, we have limitations to what we can know, and we need to accept those limitations and be content with not knowing everything. Comparing English translations and taking the differences between them seriously can help us avoid stressing a word or an emphasis in our English Bibles that the biblical author never intended for us to stress. And it can help us understand why some doctrinal differences exist within the Christian community. If you have the time and the opportunity, I highly encourage you to learn Hebrew, Aramaic, Greek. If you don't have the time or opportunity, then use and trust your English Bibles, but just recognize the limitations in how much we can know by just using English. And learn from scholars who read and analyze the biblical languages by comparing English translations and by reading my book to learn general principles about word meaning. And that will enable you to intelligently think about what you hear and read about the meanings of biblical words.